Kwame Christian, welcome to Empathy at the Table. This really fills me with pride to actually say these words. Thank you for joining us at Empathy at the Table.
Hey, man, it is my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
You definitely take the prize for the best dressed guest I've ever had on the show. I mean, you're really doing it with the pocket handkerchief and everything. I mean, yeah. For the viewers or listeners who can't see, make sure you watch this on YouTube and see how Kwame's shown up for the dance. He looks awesome. Welcome
I
again.
I appreciate it. I always say I look better when my wife dresses me, so yeah, you have to thank her.
So for the very few people in our world of negotiation that don't know you, most people will have heard of you, but for those that don't, could you just give us a brief intro, a run up to who you are and what it is that's made you so popular?
Yeah, so I'm Kwame Christian, the CEO of the American Negotiation Institute. I host the number one negotiation podcast in the world, Negotiate Anything, and two best-selling books. First one is Finding Confidence in Conflict, and the second one is How to Have Difficult Conversations About Race. And yeah, it's been a fun journey. We do keynotes. We have a lot of digital products and partnerships with LinkedIn as well. We have about 45 LinkedIn learning courses, and over 1.2 million people have gone through that course. And so for me, with whatever it is that we do, my goal is to be as generous as possible and just flood the web with as much content about negotiation and conflict resolution as possible, because our motto is we believe the best things in life are on the other side of difficult conversations. So our goal is to make the world a better place, one difficult conversation at a time.
Wow. Sounds like a true pro. That's fantastic. So, Kwame, I did a bit of research on you, and the thing that I love that has come up for me is how you have connected who you are today and what you've dedicated your life to doing to your childhood. You call yourself a recovering people pleaser, and as a child, you showed that photo of yourself and the diversity which you grew up in, and you had this desire to want to be a people pleaser. Can you just for the listeners, can you explain that history so we can draw like a red thread from who that Kwame was then to why you've dedicated yourself to now making sure that you provide this platform for dealing with challenging conversations?
Yeah, it is. It's a fascinating origin story. So I'm a first generation Caribbean American. My family is from the Caribbean. My dad is from a small island called Dominica, and my mom's from Guyana. And so I grew up in a small town in Ohio called Tiffin. And so I was the only black kid in the school for a long time. And I had a really strong Caribbean accent at that time, shockingly, because my parents taught me how to talk. And I remember on the playground one time when I was 6 years old, just going around to different kids on the playground, just asking to play. And so I'd go talk to one kid and they would say no. I would go in and talk to another group of kids and they said no. And that happened the whole recess. And then I went back into the classroom and I just burst out into tears. And my teacher said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Nobody would play with me." And so from that moment, I said, well, I will never feel this way again. I'm going to be liked. I'm going to have a lot of friends. And so I just changed the whole way that I navigated the world because of that. And so at the end of school, like when you go to like going into high school and after high school, I was the most popular kid in school. Like everybody knew my name. It was great. But that whole process turned me into a people pleaser because I would make compromises throughout that time. And so I would say yes when I actually disagreed, and I wouldn't stand up for myself because I worked so hard to get these relationships and I didn't want to do anything to jeopardize the relationships that I worked hard to create. So then one time I had a mentor in college and he said, there's a difference between being liked and being respected. So if you want to have that success that you want to eventually achieve, you have to be willing to have tough conversations. And so it wasn't until law school that I actually discovered negotiation. I was still struggling with this, but trying to force myself to learn how to be more assertive. And I stumbled into a negotiation class only because it fit into my schedule. And I fell in love because I learned that for the first time, self advocacy is a skill. not a talent. I can actually learn how to do this. So we had these negotiation competitions, and I competed at the one in the law school, and my partner and I, we won that. And then we went to the regional competition in Ottawa, Ontario with the American Bar Association, and we won that competition too. Just because I was obsessed with the topic, I was hooked. So I said to myself, okay, I don't know what it is that I'm going to do with my career, but I know that negotiation is going to be a central part of it.
Mm. And when you were doing those negotiation classes and the competitions, what was the overarching kind of framework for negotiations then versus how you see it now?
Yeah, at that time they set it up so you had a partner, you were co-negotiating, and you were up against another side. And they had a panel of judges on the side observing it, judging how well the outcome related to the process, how well you collaborated with your partner and the other side in the process and everything like that. So they would give you a fictional scenario. You would have your client's data, your confidential information, and then they would have theirs. And then you try to negotiate the best deal possible in front of the judges in the time period. So
Mm.
it was a lot of fun. It was a
Mm.
lot of fun, but as I have matured now in my career, I recognize there's a lot that is valuable and applicable there, but then also there are some things that I think in that competition and in general kind of holds back the negotiation field because there's a performative and stylistic aspect of those competitions. I mean, there has to be. But I recognize that a lot of times with negotiation literature, what ends up happening is thought leaders are codifying their personality. They're saying, this is what works for me, but they're
Mm.
not saying it like that. They're really saying, this is what works in general for everybody. And so a lot of people end up saying, oh, I'm reading this book, and their approach isn't something that I feel comfortable with. I
Yeah.
don't, maybe I'm a bad negotiator because I don't negotiate that way. But what I'm finding is that you have to be self aware enough to understand who you are and confident enough in who you are to negotiate authentically. And the best negotiators are the ones who can stick to the fundamentals of negotiations. They have good negotiation skills and they execute upon those negotiation skills authentically. So the way that I negotiate effectively is going to be different from the way that you negotiate effectively and the way that other people negotiate. But we have to understand who we are and then be empathetic to understand the other side and then adjust as necessary while still being authentic to be effective in the negotiation.
You know, I have to say, the reason I'm here is because of you, Kwame. I mean, I have to let people know, you, I mean, I've been following you for years, and I kind of got into the world of negotiation because I was fascinated by it. And then, you know, I loved your podcast, love your style of conversation. I love the authenticity. And I just don't know how it happened, but you kind of approached me and we had a conversation, right? And in that conversation, it blew my mind. And what started my journey was a statement that you made, and you said, "We are using prehistoric tools to try and fight modern battles." And you talked about the amygdala hijack that we have, and the way that our brains are set up for living in the caveman era, and we're still using those tools today, and that blew my mind. So can you reframe that concept for listeners, and then let's do a bit of a deep dive into um, how that actually plays out in modern day life.
I will, but first, Tony, I have to answer the question that you almost asked but didn't, which was how you got on my radar. So, listeners, the way Tony got on my radar was the same way he got on your radar. Your work is exceptional; it speaks for itself. And so, I saw your work on negotiation on LinkedIn, and I started to pay attention. I was like, oh man, I got to talk to this guy. And your episode was a masterclass. So, yes, it's
Thank
great to
you.
see you producing content because we need more people producing content, sharing their thoughts and doing it in their own authentic way.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to see that you're out here doing this. And
Thank
when it
you,
comes to
Kwame.
the psychology of this, it's fascinating. It is both scary and empowering when you start to understand the psychology, because when you recognize that the things like once the amygdala and the limbic system start firing and you have that fight or flight response, your brain cannot think clearly. And it's an antagonistic relationship between the frontal lobe and the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. So if you're very, very emotional, you're not thinking clearly. But if you're
Mm.
thinking clearly, you're usually less emotional. It's an either or proposition. And then when you take that reality to difficult conversations, you recognize that everybody is emotional all the time almost.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you're trying to use these negotiation tactics, sales tactics, persuasion techniques, you have these lines lined up and everything, and you're wondering why they're not working, they might not be working because you are not able to connect and you haven't developed your emotional intelligence. You're not understanding the emotional temperature of the room, and you don't understand how to lower the emotional temperature of the room
Mm.
so we can actually graduate to a higher level conversation. And I think once people start to recognize that, first of all, it helps you to not take these emotional responses as personally. It's like we're saying this is just a psychobiological response that's happening in the brain. It's not
Mm.
necessarily about me. And once we start to make those reads, we can say, ah, yes, this is why my point isn't landing at this moment. They're emotionally triggered. It's not my fault, but it is my responsibility to do my best to manage this situation. And then
Excellent.
once you can step back and do that, that's when you start to really take off when it comes to these tough conversations.
I really like that concept you just framed. Um, when you see this happening, you realize that it's like a chemical reaction. It's just happening, and so it's nothing personal. It's just as you wake up in the morning and it's raining. It's not personal to you. It's just where it is. But then how you respond to that, that's the part that's personal to you. Um, and so, are you able to do this in real time, Kwame?
It takes time.
Yeah.
It takes time. And but once you start to pay attention to it,
Right.
then it starts with observation, but then you start to practice it, try to put it into practice, and then you can start to do it in real time.
Yeah.
And it's tough. And it's tough especially because probably you're triggered in the moment too. You don't
Yeah.
want you it's really tough when you are being called to be respectful and empathetic and validate when somebody is not being respectful, empathetic, or
Yeah. Yeah.
validating
Yeah.
what it is that
Yeah.
you're feeling too. But once you start to recognize these patterns and you put it into practice and you start to generate some success, that's when you start to become more confident, not just in your skills, but also the process. And it allows you to sit in the heat of the moment without feeling like you're getting burned. And you can actually
Right.
put it into practice when it matters most.
That sounds like a superpower. You have this a phrase that you use a lot, and I love it, and I'd really like you to do. Let's pick the fruit off the tree of this one. The compassionate curiosity. I really love that. Share with us what that means, and then how we can actually see that in practice.
Thank you. Yes. So, compassionate curiosity is my approach to difficult conversations.
Yeah.
And it's a three-part framework where first, what you do is you acknowledge and validate the emotions of the other side. And second, we get curious with compassion, asking open ended questions with a compassionate tone. And then lastly, we engage in joint problem solving. But it's a flexible framework that allows you to know what to say and when to say it for maximum impact. So if
Mm.
there's an emotional challenge in front of you, you say, all right, step one, I'm going to acknowledge and validate the emotions. If there's a situation where you need to connect, build rapport, empathize with the other side, and generate understanding, then you get curious with compassion because negotiation is an information game. The more information I have, the better I will be in when it comes to problem solving. But maybe as I'm asking questions, something gets triggered in the other side and they get emotional. I don't force it to go to step number three. I say, oh, okay, they're emotional again. I'm going to fall back and go straight back to number one. So it
Mm.
helps you to make better reads. And what you'll recognize, Tony, is with this approach, we're not teaching people like cool one liners or when you say this, they will for sure say that, all of that stuff. No, it allows you to flow in the moment, make some reads, and you know what to say and when to say it for
Mm.
maximum impact.
And I like the way you use the word. This was an approach. It's not a tactic, right? Tactic is it feels almost manipulative, but when you talk about an approach, it feels more. It allows you to be you, right? This is the approach that we're taking, but you are at liberty to use your own style, your own personality, as opposed to using a tactic that you've read in a book. Um,
Absolutely.
I want to get a bit deeper, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
So your approach to having these challenging conversations, again, one of the things I really like is that you walk your talk, and I know you've been involved. You were quite vocal about race and diversity. You've kind of taken up the mantle, and you've had these challenging conversations. Tell me what you've learned about yourself and about other people when you get involved in these real sticky conversations.
I would say that everybody cares, but not everybody knows how to articulate that care. I think one of the things that was really refreshing is
Mm,
that when I meet people out on the road doing the book tours and things like that, we have people of all different backgrounds, different belief systems, different political ideologies, whatever it
yeah,
happens to be. And people have an opinion, like everybody has an opinion on these topics, but then when it comes to how we articulate that opinion, it's very tough. And I think one of my favorite pieces of feedback that I got on the book was from a fellow negotiation expert, Mike Reddington. He's an expert in listening, police interrogator. That's his background. And he's like, "Hey, Kwame, I was reading the book. I read all of it, and I know I don't mean any offense by this, but when I was reading it, it's a negotiation book. Like that's what this is." I was like, exactly. That's
mm,
exactly what this is. We are bringing the
right.
tried and true and heavily tested negotiation, conflict resolution, and
Mm,
communication techniques, and we're just
mm,
bringing it to this really sensitive conversation. And
mm,
with the book, what I did is I wasn't pushing any ideology or anything like that. I was
mm,
just pushing the skills. If you want to have these conversations,
mm,
here are some of the psychological barriers that make them so difficult. Here are some of the emotional barriers that make them so difficult in yourself and others. Now, here's how to overcome it and how you can have higher level conversations.
mm,
And that's been what's so exciting because people were really lacking in the skill of having these tough conversations. And so for me, I think about it in terms of if you can manage your emotions in these hard conversations and you can apply these skills in a conversation like this, then you can have those exact same skills and apply it effectively in your tough conversation at work, at home, on
yeah.
whatever the subject is. And I think that's been what's so powerful about the journey, just recognizing how hungry people are for understanding the skill set behind how to have the tough conversation about
Mm.
race and other issues.
So in your experience, you feel people want to have the conversation, but they don't have the skill set to actually have their conversation with others.
Yeah, I'd say most people want to, and then
Mm,
there's some people who don't want to, who find themselves having to. Right? And so they might find themselves in these conversations. They're like, Kwame, I don't want to have this conversation. Number
right.
one, it's unavoidable for me in this conversation, they might say. How do I have it without getting canceled, getting in trouble, or saying something offensive, hurting somebody's feelings? How do I approach it that way? Or let's say you don't want to have a conversation about this or a sensitive topic. How do I skillfully and respectfully back out? Right. And so I wanted to make sure that I created a toolkit for anybody no matter what side they're on, where they can say, all right, this is the tool that I can use. Because my vision is this starts conversations between people who have different backgrounds, different belief systems, different ideologies. Because at the end of every chapter, we have discussion questions. So whoever you are, this is a manual for you. Because you think about most of the books that are written on this topic, there's a really strong ideology behind it, where it would be immediately rejected by a certain portion of the
Yeah.
population.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
you're like, oh, well, I believe this, read this book, you read
Right.
page one, you're like,
Right.
absolutely not.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
No matter, we see it on every side, right? So I
Yeah.
wanted to create something where it's like, all right, cool. You believe this, you believe that. You both can read this book and now connect and kind of speak the same language, regardless of whether or not you agree. But what ends up happening, Tony, is that they start to recognize just how similar they are
Right.
and how it might seem like they're different and they believe different things, but there's more in common than there is that separates us. And so it brings people together, and then they could work together and bring their own viewpoints into what it takes to solve the problem at hand. And I think that's what's really great. People are using this in their communities and their businesses to
Mm,
move things forward collectively and collaboratively, which is just the spirit of negotiation, but
yeah.
again, just brought to a new field.
This is why you and I get along so well, because this I share 100% the same philosophy, and I believe in this from my very core. I had a conversation last week with two women, and we were talking. We started off talking about sex in the workplace, right? The fact that 50% of the world's population are women, but they're underrepresented when it comes to real positions of authority. And we wanted to really analyze what's really going on. Is it because women look different from men? Is it because people of different races look different from each other? And as we conversed and got deeper and deeper, we realized actually it's not really about what you look like. It's what I believe you represent. I believe you represent values that are different to mine. And I don't want my values, my belief systems to in any way to be compromised. And so therefore, if you look different to me, then the natural link is that if you look different to me, then you're going to think differently and you're going to have a different set of values. And so therefore we can't combine. And having these conversations and realizing that actually our values are quite similar, suddenly the other stuff just evaporates into the air, right? Once you can get down to that conversation about values. And I think what you're talking about and your approach gets straight to the heart of it, right? It allows us to talk about what we value most, what we believe to be true most, and have those conversations.
Absolutely. When you have the skills to
Yeah,
actually have the conversation, the armor that people put up
yeah,
and the surface area that can make us look so different, because on our surface we look very different,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And then because we're different, we put on that armor to protect ourselves. But if you have the right conversation, you can melt away that armor, and then
yeah,
you can dig beneath the surface and just recognize that we are just two imperfect people just trying to
yeah,
share our versions of the truth. We are just trying to share space and understand each other and be understood.
yeah,
And it's a very unique thing to be able to do that. But if you can, I mean, it's magical. It avails you to new relationships and connections that you never thought were possible. And just going back to the fact that we often share values, most of the time we don't even have a healthy enough conversation to get to the point that we recognize that we share values. A lot of times we have two people arguing over the same thing, trying to say that the same thing in different ways, and they think they disagree. And what I say is, when we think about in difficult conversations, we say it's important to build rapport, right? But let's
yeah.
actually dig down deeply and understand what that is. When you think about bias, a lot of times people think about bias as a bad thing. I think just bias is a psychological reality. There's no way to live a life without any kind of bias. And it's only a problem if you allow that to interrupt your decision making without your knowledge. So we have to be aware that we have biases, other people have biases. Biases don't make us bad, they make us human. And it's my responsibility as a communicator and a negotiator to understand what biases exist in you and in me, and then create psychological strategies that can work through that. And so the more different I am from somebody, the more I step back and I say, all right, so most likely there is in group, out group bias. They don't think I'm within their group. So let me slow down and empathize and understand who they are, what their values are, and what group they belong to. And then I'm going to show those parts of myself that complement them, so they can look at me and they say, hey, Kwame is one of us. He is
Right,
in our group. We share the same values. And now what am I doing? This is a bias strategy. I recognize that in group, out group bias might have been causing a problem. So I'm going to slow down. I'm going to understand. I'm going to empathize. And then I'm going to use affinity bias strategically. So think about affinity bias. It is you are like me, so I like you. And in the DEI diversity space, they look at this always as a bad thing, where it's like, well, people always hire the same people who look and sound and think like them. Well, I can understand how it can be bad in that context. But in this context, I'm going to use it positively in my favor, because I'm going to figure out who they are, and I'm going to show parts of myself that help them to recognize that we are the same. And
right,
so that might take the entry point of the conversation, like that rapport building part of the conversation. I might just say, in this strategically in this conversation, I'm going to spend more time building that empathy and rapport. If it's you and me, Tony, I might just build rapport for 2 minutes and then we can go into the substance. But the more different the person is, I might extend that 5, 10, 15 minutes until
right.
I start to feel that warmth. And then once I start to feel that warmth and connection, now I can go into the substance, because we are playing the same game, we are playing on the same team, and we can work collaboratively together through the rest of the conversation.
I mean, there's a context to this, that you as Kwame, you also have to care enough about the person in the relationship to put in that time and effort, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's an inescapable reality. And we
Yeah.
have to figure out how we can care, which sounds like a weird thing to say. It sounds like a weird thing to say. Oh, you should care. Okay. I
Mm.
mean, somebody might not. And so you have to figure out what it is that is a true motivator to you, and then
Right.
utilize that unashamedly.
Yeah.
Right. And so sometimes, like, I'm a competitive guy, and as a negotiator, if you're a competitive person, that can take away from the collaborative nature of the
Yeah.
negotiation. So I have to change my competitive focus to something that is collaborative. So when there's a really tough conversation and the person is very emotional, I play a game. I'm like, they are very mad right now. They don't agree with me at all. I bet I bet I can get them to calm down by the end of the conversation. We'll be laughing and joking. I bet we can do that.
Nice.
I
Nice.
don't, let's say I don't understand this person, or I don't agree with this person. Like, vehemently, I'll say, okay, I bet that I can understand this person so well that they will be shocked at my depth of understanding. So I'm going to play this game. I'm going to sit back. I'm going to listen. I'm going to empathize. I'm going to vent. I'm going to let them vent. I'm going to validate. And I'm going to do that so well that it will shock them. Like,
So you gamify it,
oh, I
and you
give,
take it into
yeah.
a competition with yourself. That's fantastic.
Absolutely. It makes it fun. And so you
Yeah.
bring a completely different energy to the conversation in that
Yeah.
moment. Like, I'm not taking it personally anymore. This is a skills building opportunity for me. And
Great.
when you think about it that way, it makes you relentlessly productive in
Yeah.
this
I
in
love
this
that.
search for collaborative solution.
Yeah. I'm definitely going to use that, I bet. Yeah. So, Kwame, how do we take this beautiful cocktail of um, conversational skills and compassionate curiosity? How do we take this into the boardroom? How do we take this into corporate companies where all they're doing is pushing for profit and the bottom line, and just giving value back to shareholders? How does that actually play out in that world?
Well, I'll start off with a cheesy joke, and then I'll go into a more serious reaction.
Okay.
So first, Tony, what you need to do is you need to believe. You need to believe it's possible. The power of belief,
Cheesy.
and and once you believe, you can achieve it. But jokes aside, I think the fact that people don't believe it could work holds them
Mm.
back. So they hear this and they say, not going to work. And so they don't even run that personal experiment to see if it can. And then another thing that I recognize too is that when it comes to these tough conversations, a lot of, hold on one second. I think my team is asking me where I am, and they are blowing up my phone.
That's
Just give
okay.
me 1 second. Let me send this message to him.
Yeah, hopefully we should be able to edit this part out of the conversation.
Yeah, I figured. I just was like, it happened like 8 times, and it was getting
Yeah,
me out of my flow. Okay, all right. Sorry
yeah.
about that. Um, I'll one just old school podcasting tip. One of the things I do to make it easier for the editors is I just clap twice, and so you see the spike in the sound wave, and that's when you know, oh, that's where I need to edit on the audio side.
Okay,
So
let's
it makes
do
it a
it.
little bit easier. There we go. All
There
right,
you
cool.
go.
So
Thanks.
I'll go back to what I was saying. One thing that I recognize that holds people back in these tough conversations is that they know what to do and they will put it into practice, but they will give up on the strategy before it actually
Mm.
works. They don't do the right thing long enough for it to work. And when you are talking to a great negotiator, sometimes one of the things that's so fascinating is how underwhelming their approach might be. Because you're saying, you ask any negotiator, any negotiation expert, hey, what are the keys to negotiation? You got 60 seconds to tell me what you need to do. You need to listen effectively. You need to show respect. You need to ask open-ended questions. You need to empathize and let the other person know that they're understood, right? Every negotiation expert would say that. And
Yeah.
then what
Yeah.
ends up happening is people hear that and then they try it for 7 minutes and it doesn't work. And they say, man, this doesn't work. I'm going to be mean again. Right. And so what we have to do is we actually have to trust the process. We have to say, yes, this does work. And I'm going to do it until it does work. Some of these
Yeah.
conversations can be incredibly long. I think about, for me, when I was practicing law, when I was a mediator, like these conversations are hours long. You might have to
Mm.
stay in this empathetic mindset, asking questions and being relentlessly proactive for an extended period of time, and then it works. So I had William Ury on the podcast 2 days ago, and he's the co-author of Getting to Yes, the best-selling book in negotiation ever. I think about him as a godfather of the field.
The
And he,
Godfather. Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
and that was he was telling the story about his negotiation with Hugo Chavez as he was trying to negotiate peace in Venezuela, and he said that he was having the conversation and he said something that made President Chavez incredibly upset. And Chavez just yelled at him for 30 straight minutes. And he said, yelled at me, screaming
Wow.
at me, so close that I could feel his breath on my face. And he said, I
Wow.
just listened for 30 minutes. And then when he was done, he said, so what should I do? That he vented for 30 straight minutes, and then once he got it out of his system, he asked for his advice, and then he used the rest of the negotiation techniques. Somebody else might have been able to last 29 minutes, and then they would have broken down, right?
Mm.
And so I'm not advocating for tolerating abuse. There's a different dynamic that was happening in that situation. But I do think it exemplifies the key of a great negotiator. You have patience, you have restraint, you know what
Mm.
to say and when to say it. And sometimes the best thing to say in the moment is nothing. And sometimes, even if you know that's the right answer, you might make the wrong move to alleviate pressure. I think about it like chess. I love playing chess. And in chess, there's a concept called productive tension. There's a piece. I can kill your piece. You can kill my piece. And there's tension there. But based on the positioning of the pieces on the board, I actually know that the best thing for me to do is leave my piece there and develop the other parts of the game. And the other person, strategically, the best thing they should do is leave their piece there and advance the other parts of the game. But
Right.
what ends up happening is that novice chess players will make a mistake, not because they believe it's the right thing to do, but they will do that to alleviate the pressure of the moment. And so when it comes to bringing these skills to the boardroom, going back to my cheesy response, belief is a quintessential element of the process. Because when
Mm.
things start to go downhill, where it feels like things are going the wrong direction and the pressure is getting on, we we say to ourselves, I need something else. I need to say something different. I need to do something different. No, you
Mm.
need to continue the application of the consistent negotiation fundamentals that will work as long as you give it time to work.
Wow. Dropping some pearls right here. I'm telling you, right? This I think this is like pearl drop per second. I need to, when I listen to this, I'm going to have to figure out how many you've dropped so far. This is fantastic. You know, I had a guest on maybe about 3 months ago, and he was talking about this idea of it's called the economics of mutuality. And the idea that when you are in a specific paradigm where right now everybody negotiates to get the best for themselves, they advocate for themselves, but inherently you know that there's another way to negotiate where everybody can actually walk away happy. But you're already still in the existing paradigm. So he advocates for the bravery it takes for you to advocate for the new paradigm while the old paradigm still exists. And I think this is kind of similarly what you're saying, right? You just have to have that belief that this will happen. And when I forced to ask him, well, you know, what's the motivation for people to do that? His answer was, what would happen if nobody did it? What would happen if everybody carried on, right? So if you think about that, and it leads me on to the question I was going to ask you is, what have you seen, Kwame, in your day-to-day business, your day-to-day dealings with negotiation? What have you seen happens when things go wrong and people actually go off the beaten path and go back into old style of negotiation?
Well, what ends up happening is that depending on the circumstance, they might get a good deal if they have a lot of leverage, but they do it to the detriment of the relationship.
Hmm.
And I'll tell you a story about this. So I remember I was doing a training with this massive procurement organization, part of a multi-billion-dollar company, and they said I remember one time I was having this negotiation, and the dynamics of the relationship have swung in a direction where the other side had all the leverage. They knew it, we knew it, and we were trying. We're just saying we were at their mercy. We're like, please don't do this. Please do not do this unilateral price increase. It felt like a hostage situation. And they're like, yeah, we're doing this. And so now they claim that value in that moment. The other side, let's say, and for the audio only listeners, I'm using heavy sarcastic air quotes here. They won the negotiation. Okay, so now let's fast forward 3 years, and now the power dynamics have shifted. And
Right.
my client said, I was so excited when I gleefully picked up the phone and made that call back to the supplier who leveraged us unfairly, breaching the contract in order to claim more value. And he said the
Yeah.
first thing I said on that call was, "Do you remember 3 years ago
Wow.
when we talked?" And so here's the thing. Those old school negotiation techniques, they only work if you have the hammer, if you have an exorbitant amount of power and leverage. Otherwise, when the scales are a little bit more balanced, they don't work. And when you're
Yeah.
playing from a deficit, they don't work. And the thing that that people fail to recognize is that power is dynamic. It's not static. You may have the power right now. That does not mean that you will have it forever. And also, we are neglecting the power of collaborative negotiation and creative problem solving. So let's say I can claim all of the value on this table. Let's just make up random numbers. Let's just say I can claim 10 units of value. There are 10 units of value on the table. I'm taking all of it and I'm leaving you with nothing. But if I engage in a bit of collaborative problem solving, we might be able to expand the pie. And now there are 25 units of value. I'll take 15, you take 10. And so
Hmm.
ultimately, I end up with more overall, even though I don't get the same percentage. And I think
Hmm.
what ends up happening is that people get very tunnel visioned when they are in these situations. Let's go back to what we talked about before when we talked about the fear responses, fight, flight, freeze, and some other fear responses as well. When you're afraid, it narrows your focus. It narrows your focus in a dangerous type of way. And it makes it very difficult for you to widen your aperture and consider alternative possibilities. And so, what's the scariest thing is that if you go back to that old paradigm, you're going to be missing out on value, you're going to be missing out on relationships, and you might not ever fully understand or appreciate just how much you've lost because of that shift.
Wow. I mean, this can go on forever for me. We must make a deal, right, Kwame, that if you're ever in Europe or if I'm ever anywhere near Ohio, we have to meet up. I'd like to bring a nice bottle of Spanish red over to you, and we can sit and just kind of talk this through, because I absolutely loved speaking with you. I think your insights are fantastic. I think you have a real way of expressing and synthesizing some of the most complex issues that we feel that we come across, and I'm really pleased that I have you here to help through this conversation with us. We are coming to the end of the podcast, so I'd like to just ask you two questions. The first question is, are you still dunking on your birthday?
I'm telling you, Tony, the last dunk was sketchy. I don't know. So that my last birthday, that was the 35th birthday. So now I'm
Yeah.
officially closer to 40 than 30. So
Yeah.
that I felt that one. But I will say I will say I realized I need to prepare more in advance. So I have about 5 months. I started investing in like a personal trainer who's stretching me out once a week. I've been working out 5 to 7 times a week. I've actually been lifting legs. So,
Yeah.
so I am. Listen, I don't know. I don't know, Tony, but I've been preparing.
Yeah, well, you put it out there, so the world is waiting for it. Um,
Thank you.
and finally, Kwame, how can people connect with you, and what is it that you're working on at the moment that people can help you with?
Yes. So connect with me on LinkedIn. That's the best way to connect. And we, with Negotiate Anything, we have over 1,000 episodes of the show. And the complaint or feedback that we get the most is that we love the show, but there are so many episodes. We have an episode coming out every single day. They're like, we can't keep
Wow.
up. And it's hard for us to see which episodes really speak to us. And so what we did is we responded by creating a program. It's going to launch May 1st of 2024 called Negotiate Anything Premium, where you'll be able to listen to the podcast ad free and you'll be able to pick the categories of episodes that you want. So if you just want negotiation skills and strategies, focus on those episodes. If you just want empathy and leadership, focus on those episodes. Career, salary, and career advancement, focus on those episodes. So it allows you to really pick your own learning journey for a low monthly cost.
Excellent. Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Kwame Christian, who is the godfather of negotiation podcast, Negotiate Anything. He has the number one podcast in the world, interviewed all of the heavyweights within the negotiation industry. He himself is what I would call a Tyrannosaurus Rex of the negotiation world. Kwame Christian, thank you for joining us. Empathy at the table.
It was my pleasure, Tony. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Take care now.
Awesome. Cool. You still there, Tony? Ooh.